This is the Mypressi Twist, and it is a super unique, fun, potentially dangerous espresso machine that I want to tell you all about today. So this is a portable espresso machine, as we see here. It's basically a handle with a trigger with a hot water chamber, a basket here, and an area for you to add your power source for the pressure, which is your nitrogen charger canister here that you'll find in some other machines, as well as for like your airsoft guns. Most simply put, this is a absolutely wild espresso machine to use. You basically just add hot water in here and your coffee, and you pull the trigger and you have your espresso. I'll show you how I've been using it, and we'll go over some operations of it. Pretty much what I want to talk about today is I think this is such a unique machine. It's another one of these machines that feels like the Nomad, way ahead of its time, especially if you apply some modern techniques, which we will show today. We'll pull some crazy stuff like turbo bloom, because you can do that when you have a relatively large water chamber and you have a lot of power, and you actually can get some insanely nice extraction out of this, which is hilarious to say, because when you look at this thing, you're like, what? This is an espresso machine? This is unfortunately discontinued. You can't buy them anymore, so you got to make sure that you don't damage these pieces, especially when you take them apart. But it is very interesting. So here's how it works. Basically, we have a hot water chamber up here. This is our brew chamber that has a shower screen on it, and then we have our basket. This is a really unique basket. It's a 53mm basket, pretty tall and chamfered to help you build pressure. So you don't actually need the finest grind in the world to get espresso. And then here is the actual kind of handle itself, where you stick a nitrogen charger in here. You just unscrew this and it stabs the nitrogen charger, and this is where it goes in, and then you press the trigger and the nitrogen gas goes through this O-ring up into the chamber, and then it pushes the water through your puck. I also think it's a little not necessarily on the safer side, especially because there is no stand. You kind of need to hold this thing with that can dispense boiling, very, very hot water. Each of these nitrogen canisters lasts around 4 shots, though depending on what you're doing, and I'm kind of alluding to things, it could end up being a little bit less. But essentially, we have our handle here with the trigger. You take your charger here, you stick it in here. There's a little puncturing section here that will puncture the valve and will essentially charge this all up. And you will use the trigger to release the nitrogen and give you the pressure and the power to pull espresso. But you do this, and as I screw this in, the charger is going to get pushed up, and we're going to be able to charge the system. If I press this, we're going to get our air release there, and that is what is going to push the water down into our basket here. So now that that's ready, the next part of this is you do want to preheat this brew chamber. So it's really cool to me that this is a relatively modular system, but this is the brew chamber here. It's 2 pieces, and inside here it's basically some metal, plastic, and there are a bunch of rubber O-rings. I do think that these O-rings and some of these pieces you will need to be careful of, just make sure they don't crack over time. What I've been doing is I've actually been treating this basket a lot like my La Pavoni baskets, so like these 14-gram doses, and actually what I've been able to do is fit around 90 milliliters into this chamber, or it feels pretty comfortable doing around 85, 90 mils. So what that allows you to do is it allows you to get flexibility in what you're able to pull, and actually a larger yield than something like this La Pavoni, which is super funny. While you preheat this, you can go ahead and actually prep out your brew. So you basically do this, you pour your boiling water in here. We're gonna just let this guy sit here and preheat. Now, some things that I've found out doing this is you definitely want to have this little cover here. It kind of locks in there, but I just put it up there. From a very basic, cold room temperature, if you add boiling water into here, I found it drop basically 20 Celsius. So the kind of hottest I've been able to just get this is around 85, 86 Celsius, which is actually perfectly fine for a few different things. So this is preheating, and I think what would be fun is actually showing you guys two ways to use this. One is just, I think, the traditional 10 years ago way to do it, and I'll show you a more modern method. I'm just gonna do 14 grams, and I'm gonna pull basically a 1 to 2. And this right here is preheating. You know, luckily this is not hot to the touch, but if you do some measurements, you will find out that your temperature does stabilize at around like 75 to 80 Celsius. So it is recommended to preheat maybe a little more aggressively if you are using a lighter roast coffee. With some of these developed coffees, like this one here, this sight glass coffee, it actually works perfectly fine because we are gonna be dumping that hotter water over into the chamber as well. And then we're just gonna WDT, then take our tamper, try to align that the best as possible, give it a tamp. And what I'll do is I'll just drop it into here. Now, this chamber here is probably around 75 Celsius now with off the boil water. And this will help us, you gotta be really careful, like this is all pretty hot here, is I'm just going to take this guy, you'll see a marker here, and then you see the steam coming off of this. You lock it in. We're gonna pour boiling water right into here, and I'm not gonna fill the chamber up all the way because I'm probably just gonna pull a 1 to 2 with this. You find the marker here, you lock it in, turn it in, and then we can begin pressing. And you kind of just hold and you go for it. And I'm just pulling a 1 to 2. So I'm gonna end up at around 28 grams. And then what you should do is you do a swap. So I did a swap a little slow there, but that was 30 grams in 25 seconds. And what you can do here is if you have excess water, you can treat this like a lever machine, and you can use some of your nitrogen gas in here to just fully get a really dry puck. And you'll see this bubble up, yep, like you see on your lever machines. I let go of the trigger there, and now what I have to do is I'm just gonna let this stop bubbling. This is now gonna have a really dry puck like we're used to. So take this out here. There sometimes is a little bit of water that remains inside of here, but basically I can now take this off, and then I have my really dry puck. This by the way gets really hot as you use it, but we have a very dry puck that, this is a hot basket, that just knocks out like that. So very much similar like a lever machine, but as we see some splatters in a bunch of places. I'll get my phone out here so you can see a close-up of this, but we have very traditional espresso right there. Tastes very well extracted. For this coffee, I was pulling it around like 22%. I really actually enjoy these more traditional coffees with the twist. I mean, like, that was pretty hard, right? You know, we just prepped the puck, we poured the boiling water into preheat, then we dumped it out, poured more boiling water, and we just held the trigger. We ended up with an espresso that I think pretty much represents this coffee very well. The one thing that you do need to keep in mind, even for these traditional coffees, is just maintaining temperature. I actually find that this temperature here it's relatively stable. Now, I didn't do any crazy measurements here, but I was able to get the chamber in here, the water in here, after I preheated it 2-3 times. You know, I preheated it once, dumped the water out, preheated again with boiling water, and I dump it out. I'm able to get this area in here, at least up here, to be about 86 Celsius, and then when I just go for it, you know, when you have everything locked in and you just pour the boiling water and you lock it in fast, it actually seems to probably be towards that 90 Celsius area, which I actually think is completely fine, especially depending on what grinder you're using, is completely fine for some of these more developed coffees. And I actually think you can pull like fantastic dark roasts on this. So the one thing that I will say about the taste of espresso here, and it might literally be due to, like, if you're shaking shaking, if you've drank a lot of coffee and you're shaking your hands and you're moving around here, your puck may not be the most evenly extracted thing in the world. You'll end up potentially getting some like weird harshness in the cup, which I've definitely experienced when I'm like slightly tilted to the side here. This coffee here is basically all sweetness and all body, all texture, although I do think some people would like a more like present textury mouthfeel that you'll get out of a more temperature stable espresso machine than this one. I honestly think this is completely fine, but that would kind of be my little nitpick with some of these more traditional coffees is I just wish there was a little bit more intensity overall, but I think the overall rest of the properties of the cup, like the mouthfeel, the finish, the sweetness, is really good. But you just want to make sure your temperature is up. If your temperature is not fully up, like and this will depend on how dark your coffee is, you can potentially get that super thin texture in the mouth, like that super thin mouthfeel from just really lower extraction, not hot enough water when you're brewing. And I love the fact that we get a very dry puck. We probably have around 2.5 more shots that we can pull on this charger. I do really like to use the excess air in here to purge and get this very dry puck. If you were curious about measurements too, I have been able to pull around like 8-9 TDS for these darker roast coffees, and that gets me to like 21-22%, which is perfect, I think, for this development level. Our normal shot tasted really good. Now let's Taco Bell bathroom this, or make this, apply these beautiful, ugly, modern espresso techniques to all of this. So basically, I'm going to repeat everything. Now, I did pull a shot, and as you'll notice, it is a pretty clean actual puck, right? Dry puck, though if you do make things dry, because we have a really weird shaped basket, you'll just need to, just rinse this and we'll be fine. This chamber stays really clean, which is awesome. Like that nitrogen really pushes everything out through here. And while we clean this up, we can begin another preheat process and we can prep in another puck. So I'll also mention is that this is another one of these machines that it's the second, third, fourth, fifth shot that you do, everything is gonna taste probably a little bit better, but depends on how aggressively you preheat for the first shot. If you remembered, the temperature that I mentioned measuring this was 86 Celsius inside of here. The really cool thing is if you look at something like the Decent Turbo Bloom profile, you can start doing the exact same thing like that. And because you have a chamber that can fit 90 mils of water, you can pull really long. So this gives you actually a fair bit of flexibility in what you do. We're gonna basically push this guy down for 1 second, and then we're gonna let the pressure drop, do nothing, and let it bloom for that basically 1 second, boom, and then we'll push it all the way again. And that's how you do a turbo bloom. And because our temperature in here is around that 86 to 88, 90 Celsius, depending on how fast we are, it actually results in a fantastic cup. And as you see, this is not the cleanest thing in the world right now. This is also really hot, so we kind of just are burning ourselves. The little metal tab here is exposed, and I just accidentally touched that and I hurt my little precious thumb, but we're doing this. And the faster I go, the better. But for this type of profile, like the Turbo Bloom, it's actually completely fine to be actually not the fastest, but we'll do this, and I'm gonna see if I can show you guys. So I'm gonna do my bloom, okay? And then now I go for it. And we're pulling 14 to 70. It is spraying everywhere, so we're gonna pour this a little bit closer to there. So we pulled there 14 to 62. I was trying to aim for 70. That was basically like 20-something seconds. I could have actually added a little bit more water or gone a little coarser. It'll kind of just pop out like that. There we go. So that's our more like untraditional espresso. I just yeeted it. I just push it down and then push it down more. I could have actually filled the chamber up slightly more. I couldn't tell. I'm looking at it at this weird angle. I could have filled it up a little bit more, went a little bit coarser, and I could have got more out. Yep. So here's the thing. This is still a good idea of the coffee. There is something slightly missing in it, and I'll tell you a bit about like where we could have done a little bit better. And the way I would classify twist shots is, even with some of these lighter roast coffees and these more traditional coffees, is you miss sometimes this like very intense note, a fruit note or flavor note that you may experience with like a much more temperature stable machine. Or what I'll say is like the rest of the shot, aka like the mouthfeel, the texture, the body, like the way it coats your tongue, as well as the finish, you know, the middle, the finish, all of that is actually really well done with the twist. The one thing that I do wish was a little bit better, and this is if I'm putting my evaluation hat on, is I wish at the initial sip I had a more intense presentation of a flavor note. You know, there isn't necessarily anything that like jumps out with the espresso. Of course, I can dial this in better. I can dial in the coffees better, right? I can profile a little bit differently with this. But generally and broadly speaking, of the shots I get with the twist, I think that they are very tasty, very approachable, very, you know, well extracted. Even if we look at it from a numbers perspective, decently extracted coffee that works well across the board. The biggest advantage of this machine is this is so much fun. You just push it down and we get really tasty coffee. It's because the twist is actually a pretty great espresso machine. It actually makes tasty coffee. And you can use this in very modern, non-traditional ways, and you can get some of these coffees to shine. But because it isn't the most temperature stable in the machine, you do need to make sure you're moving a little bit faster. But once you get it right, it tastes really good. I feel like with some of these coffees, even these lighter roast coffees, which are very not designed for this twist, I actually think a lot of people would prefer twist shots than something like a flare shot, because sometimes you don't want to have that crazy acidic, intense presentation, but you still want to have like everything else be pretty tasty. That is kind of, I would say, the limit of what the twist can do. Is it can give you pretty decently extracted coffee, but it's not gonna give you that crazy, intense, high clarity espresso that you may get out of something like a flare or a decent. But you're gonna get something nice and approachable across the board, even with these harder coffees, these lighter roast coffees. I find it fascinating that this machine came out that long ago. It's 3 pieces. It's so simple to use. There isn't kind of like this, oh, move one chamber to another, screw on another thing that has all these threads. This is the most simple one of these CO2 setups, which is just pour the water in, lock it in, and then push the trigger. I actually think this is a lot easier to use than something like the X-Bar, and the X-Bar died, and we might revisit it. But this is just, I think, so unique. It's such a unique experience. It produces a very approachable espresso, and it's fun. It's just hilarious to use this thing. Anyway, that is the Mypressi twist. It is a really unique machine. It is fascinating that this machine came out that many years ago, but look at that. It is awesome. So yeah, really wild machine, really wacky machine. I'm pretty sure a lot of you guys were like, oh wow, I remember that. But that was many years ago when this came out, before I was even drinking coffee. But yeah, that is the twist. Thank you so much for spending the time to watch this video. If you have any other questions, any other machines that you think I should take a look at, let me know. I know there are a lot of other machines that are very similar to this, but nothing kind of is as charming and unique and crazy and potentially burn your fingers dangerous as the twist. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about this. If you have any questions as well, let me know. But otherwise, thank you so much for spending the time to watch the video. I will see you guys around. So I'll do this one for fun just because I know you can do it. Is with these manual machines, making cold espresso is very possible. And the thing with this is, because there is pressure here from the CO2, it actually, I think, helps us extract these colder, the colder coffees. Now, things that you should keep in mind with brewing cold espresso, and I spent a lot of time last summer really playing around with the Nomad doing cold espresso, is you want to increase kind of bloom times. So like you do want to introduce water. And I also feel like pulling long is very helpful. So we're using the same exact sight glass coffee as we were using before. Got my cold water here. Just gonna dump that guy in here. This I'm gonna try to fill the chamber all the way to the top, so I should be able to get around that 90 milliliters into here. So I should be able to pull some of these 1 to 7s. Okay, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a bloom. So we're gonna just let that sit for around like around a minute. And usually I found this to work okay. I've never done this. We're trying this out. I didn't expect it to go out so much like that, but I found that if you do introduce water in like a pre-infusion blooming type of thing with cold espresso, and you let it sit there for around like a minute or 2 minutes, it does result in a decently tasty cup. I didn't expect 4 grams to come out, but I guess we'll be holding this for another minute or so. I think I'm just gonna pull this at 1 minute 30 seconds, but we did that initial bloom. Now let's go for the rest. Oh, it's spraying everywhere. I'm gonna put this down here. This is glorious. We are getting crema, which means we're building pressure. Now we're getting above 70 grams. We're getting about, I'm just gonna go for it until there's no more water. 89 out there. Oh man, this is wild. So look at that. There's our cold espresso, which honestly looks pretty good. It looks like this looks like your nitro cold brew right there. It looks kind of good actually. Not really much aromatics. That looks really good. That looks like one of those like Aerocanos or whatever people are doing nowadays. That was like basically 13 grams to 90 grams. So that's a really big ratio. It's like 10 p.m. at night, but I guess I'll try it. That's actually not bad. You get kind of that fizzy mouthfeel in here. I'm pretty sure some of that nitrogen got into here because it's cold water. So that's probably why we see so much so many bubbles in here. And also we're still retaining that like fun crema texture here. This is much more interesting. Like this is a fun thing with doing cold brew and cold espresso, but it actually tastes pretty good. From a cold perspective, we're getting a little bit of acidity from this coffee, but it's like that really nice texture that we're getting because of the high concentration, but also I think there's a little bit of fizziness in here from the nitrogen that got in here. If you've ever tasted cold brew and cold brew's been like very uninteresting to you, this has like a little bit of fun dynamics in the cup. It also tastes a lot more concentrated, obviously due to the ratio, but it's like much more interesting cold brew, and you can do that with these manual machines, and I thought it'd be fun to do with the twist. So go to the conclusion now. I thought this was fun to add in, just for fun. I mean, I think cold espresso is something that we should explore a little bit further, but on the twist, looks like we can actually make a fairly tasty cup. Very unexpected.